for the election of the chair. The clerk cannot receive other types of motions, cannot entertain points of order, nor participate in debate. We can now proceed to the election of the chair. Pursuant to the order adopted by the House on December 8th, 2021, the chair must be a member of the government party. I'm ready to receive motions for the chair. Ms. Zahid?
I would like to nominate Mr. Dhaliwal for the position of the chair.
It has been moved by Ms. Zahid that Mr. Dhaliwal be elected as chair of the committee. Are there further motions? Seeing none, is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion? I declare the motion carried and Mr. Dhaliwal duly elected chair of the committee. I'll invite the chair to take the chair.
Good evening, and I want to thank each and every one of you and giving me an opportunity to chair this meeting. And I would also love to thank Madam Clerk Burke for presiding over the meeting here earlier, and also welcome two analysts. We have Ms. Alison Goody and Julie Bichard, and also the other sports staff. If the committee is in agreement, I invite the clerk to proceed with the election of the vice chairs. And the first vice chair will be from the official opposition. Second vice chair will be from the other party other than the official opposition party.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pursuant to the order adopted by the House on December 8th, 2021, there shall be one vice chair from each of the other recognized parties. I'm now prepared to receive motions for the vice chair from the official opposition. Ms. Finley?
Madam Clerk, I nominate the Honourable Michael Chong as vice chair.
It's been moved by Ms. Finley that Mr. Chong be elected as vice chair of the committee from the official opposition. Are there any further motions? Seeing none, is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion? I declare the motion carried and Mr. Chong duly elected vice chair of the committee from the official opposition. I'm now prepared to receive motions pour le vice-président du Bloc québécois.
I'm now ready to accept motions for vice chairs for the NDP. Mr. El Khoury, yes, I nominate Mr. Duceppe. Mr. El Khoury is nominating Mr. Brunel Duceppe. Yes, you should say Brunel Duceppe, otherwise you're talking about my dad. So we're nominating Mr. Brunel Duceppe for the position of vice president. Is the committee in agreement?
Je déclare la motion.
The motion has passed, and Mr. Brunel Duceppe is now vice president of the committee, vice chair of the committee for the Bloc québécois.
I'm now prepared to receive motions for the vice chair from the NDP. Who could it be? Mr. Chong.
Nominate Madame Jenny Kwan for the position of vice chair.
It has been moved by Mr. Chong that Ms. Kwan be elected vice chair of the committee from the NDP. Is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion? I declare the motion carried and Ms. Chong duly elected NDP vice chair. Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Madam Clerk, again, and welcome to meeting number 1 of the House of Commons Special Committee on Afghanistan. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Of course, all of them are present here today. Regardless the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether participating virtually or in person. I would like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available by the House of Commons website. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from public health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, the following is recommended for all those attending the meeting in person. Anyone with symptoms should participate by Zoom, not attend the meeting in person. Everyone must maintain 2 meters physical distance, whether seated or standing. Everyone must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room. It is recommended in the strongest possible terms that members wear their masks at all times, including when seated. Non-medical masks, which provide better clarity over cloth masks, are available in the room on the back. Everyone present must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer at the room entrance. Committee rooms are cleaned before and after each meeting. To maintain this, everyone is encouraged to clean surfaces such as desk, chair, and microphone with the provided disinfectant wipes when vacating or taking a seat. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for duration of the meeting, and I thank all members in advance for their cooperation. And I also would love to congratulate Mr. Chong, Mr. Brunel Desep, and Madam Jenny Kwan to be the vice chairs, and looking forward to working with each and every one of you. Any other business? Madam Jai.
Thank you, Chair, and congratulations on being elected as Chair. Looking forward to working with you. If, with your permission, can I read the routine motions?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
So I can read one by one, and then we can go from it. The first one is analyst services, that the committee retain as needed and at the discretion of the chair the services of one or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist it in its work.
Okay. And Madam Clerk, you want to elaborate anything on these routine motions?
Should I read one by one or all together?
We can do all together. Is there a will of the committee? Or Ms. Chong?
Why don't we just adopt them?
We'll
just adopt them one by one.
One by one?
Sure.
Okay. Okay.
All in favor?
All in favor? Aye. Great.
Okay,
That's good.
The subcommittee on agenda and procedure, that the subcommittee on agenda and procedure be established and be composed of chair, one member from each recognized party, and that the subcommittee work in a spirit of collaboration.
All in favor? Carried.
Meeting without a quorum, that the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive evidence and to have that evidence published when quorum is not present, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 2 members of the opposition parties and 2 members of the government party, but when traveling outside the parliamentary precinct, that the meeting begin after 15 minutes, regardless of members present.
All in favor? Carried.
Time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses. That witnesses be given 5 minutes for their opening statement, that whenever possible, witnesses provide the committee with their opening statement 72 hours in advance, that at the discretion of the chair during the questioning of witnesses, there be allocated 6 minutes for the first questionnaire of each party as follows for the first round: Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Bloc Québécois, New Democratic Party. For the second and subsequent rounds, the order and time for questioning be as follows: Conservative Party, 5 minutes; Liberal Party, 5 minutes; Bloc Québécois, 2.5 minutes; New Democratic Party, 2.5 minutes; Conservative Party, 5 minutes; Liberal Party, 5 minutes.
All in favor? You have a question?
I do. Sorry, Mr. Chair. I just want to.
Madam Kwan, yes, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just want to ask and see whether or not there is any appetite from committee members. I know that in other committees where we go to the second round, as we sort of wrap up, oftentimes the chair would actually allow for the Bloc and the NDP to have a last 1 minute to round up the rotation. So I just want to ask and see whether or not there's appetite from committee members to follow that practice that has been done with some other committees that I've sat on.
So, any further discussions on what Ms. Kwan has brought forward? So there, it is at the discretion of the chair, or if every other party agrees, then I don't see any issues.
We don't agree.
Don't agree?
Pandemic.
Okay. Should I take? Go ahead, Mr. Alcori.
Yes, I would like to, Mr. Chair, thanks. I would like to ask Madam Kwan if it's possible to name what committee they use this practice.
In the last Parliament, the committee that I sat on as a substitute, actually I was a deputy health critic. The Health Committee, for example, adopted that. At the SIM Committee as well, we also went through rotations as such, where Madam Chair from that last committee also engaged in that practice. So, yeah, so those are 2 committees to which I had experience with.
I will recognize Mr. Brunel Duceppe, and then I'll come back to the other speakers.
Oui, merci. Puis, si je peux...
Thank you. And I would like to add something. At the SDIR committee, the time is equal for all parties in the second round. I think that would be even better. That's not even what's being asked for here. But since this committee was created unanimously, I think the amendment and the motions were adopted unanimously, and I think we could all be wise and accept this proposal from the NDP.
Okay. Parliamentary Secretary Demop, please.
So formal. In committees that I've sat on before, which were not those ones, it wasn't in the routine motions. However, the chair always did do that, as well as sometimes if we were running out of time, he would shorten the time to 3 minutes per party. I think there's lots of discretion for the chair to do that, and there's certainly the will to hear from all parties. I don't know that we actually need to amend the routine motions, but I think given the discretion the chair has, it's certainly a desire to hear from everybody when we have the time.
Yeah. Madam Jahid Sister
Thank you, Chair. And Ms. Kwan referred to the Citizenship Immigration Committee. We had nothing in the routine motions in regards to that. I think it is at the discretion of the Chair, and we have full confidence in you that based on the meeting, how much time is left, we will work collaboratively to see if there is a need.
Sure. Mr. Chong, Honorable Chong.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I think the principle of committee is the same as the principle in the House, that every member should have equal time here, other than the chair, of course, to provide commentary or to ask questions of witnesses. There are 4 Conservative members of this committee. We only have 3 slots in the first 49 minutes of questions and comments from members. If you add on to that, 5 to 10 minutes of statements from witnesses at the opening, that means in the first hour we only have 3 of 4 slots. One of our members will be denied a slot in the first hour, just on this routine motion as it currently was agreed to by the whips. And so I don't support anything that would detract from the ability of my colleagues here to have time for questions and comments. I note that the New Democratic Party has 2 slots as it stands in the routine motions, and the time allocated to the New Democratic Party, which is 8.5 minutes out of 49 minutes, is above their standings in the House of Commons. And so I don't think we should deviate from what has been proposed in the routine motions. The whips have agreed to it for a reason. It's fair to even the smaller parties in the House. In fact, it accords more time to the smaller recognized parties in the House than their standings would warrant. And any dilution beyond that means that our members here, and the Liberal members, frankly, get even less time for questions and comments at committee meetings. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chong. And I don't see there are consensus. And Madam Kwan, you want me to take a vote, or you want to leave it to my discretion as a chair?
Mr. Chair, I would support leaving it to your discretion. I would certainly hope that we can follow that practice I suggested, which I know, Mr. Chair, you were also on the SIM committee, so you would have seen how that was done previously as well.
Okay, thank you. So I will take the vote on the original motion proposed by Madam Jahid. All in favor? Okay, carried. Next one, please.
Thank you, Chair. The next one is in regards to document distribution, that only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, provided the documents are in both official languages, and that the witnesses be advised accordingly.
All in favor? Carried. Next one, please.
Working meals, that the clerk of the committee, at the discretion of the chair, be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittee.
All in favor? Carried.
The next one is travel accommodation and living expenses of witnesses, that if requested, reasonable travel accommodation and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses not exceeding 2 representatives per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair.
All in favor? Carried.
Access to in-camera meetings, that unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to be accompanied by 1 staff member at an in-camera meetings, and that 1 additional person from each House officer's office be allowed to be present.
All in favor? Carried.
The next one is transcripts of in-camera meetings, that 1 copy of the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept in the committee clerk's office for consultation by members of the committee or by their staff, and that the analysts assigned to the committee also have access to the in-camera transcripts.
All in favor? Carried.
Notice of motion, that a 48-hour notice interpreted as 2 nights be required for any substantive motion to be moved in committee unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under the consideration, provided that A, the notice be filed with the clerk of the committee no later than 4 p.m. from Monday to Friday. B, the motion be distributed to members and the officers of the whips of each recognized party in both official languages by the clerk on the same day the said notice was transmitted, if it was received no later than the deadline hour. C. Notices received after the deadline hour or on non-business days we deem to have been received during next business day, and that when the committee is holding meetings outside the parliamentary presence, no substantive motion may be moved.
All in favor? Anyone against? No. Okay, carried.
Orders of reference from the House respecting bills, that in relation to orders of reference from the House respecting bills, A, the clerk of the committee shall, upon the committee receiving such an order of reference, write to each member who is not a member of a caucus represented on the committee to invite those members to file with the clerk of the committee in both official languages any amendments to the bill which is the subject of the said order, which they would suggest that the committee consider. B. Suggested amendments filed pursuant to paragraph A at least 48 hours prior to the start of clause-by-clause consideration of the bill to which the amendments relate shall be deemed to be proposed during the said consideration, provided that the committee may, by motion, vary this deadline in respect of a given bill. And C. During the clause-by-clause consideration of a bill, the chair shall allow a member who filed suggested amendments pursuant to paragraph A an opportunity to make brief representations in support of them.
All in favor? Carried.
Thank you. The next one is technical tests for witnesses, that the clerk inform each witness who is to appear before the committee that the House Administration support team must conduct technical tests to check the connectivity and the equipment used to ensure the best possible sound quality, and that the chair advise the committee at the start of each meeting of any witness who did not perform the required technical tests.
All in favor? Carried.
The last one is linguistic review, that all documents submitted for committee business that do not come from a federal department, members' offices, or that have not been translated by the Translation Bureau be sent for prior linguistic review by the Translation Bureau before being distributed to members.
All in favor? Carried.
That's it.
That's it?
Yes.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Madam Jai. Madam Kwan, and then I will ask Mr. Brunel second.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move an additional motion for the committee's consideration, and that's in relation to the in-camera meetings. I think it would be useful and helpful for us to have clear parameters on what items should be dealt with in camera so that we don't end up spending valuable time debating what should be in camera, what shouldn't be in camera. So to that end, I'd like to move that the committee may meet in camera only for the following purposes. A, to consider a draft report. B, to attend briefings concerning national security. C, to consider lists of witnesses. And D, for any other reason with the unanimous consent of the committee.
Thank you. And I'll recognize Mr. Brunel Desep before
We'll wait for that.
Okay, thank you.
Just
Any
one
discussion on this one? If no discussion, I would like to take a vote on this one. All in favor?
Sorry, can I?
Sorry, go
I
ahead,
just-
Honorable Chong.
Yeah,
please.
sure,
Go.
just on this proposal. I mean, the difficulties with this is that it's going to, it says that all votes taken in camera. Sorry? You didn't move that part? Okay, well, that's what I have here in front of me. Sorry, what?
I only moved A to D. Should I repeat, Mr. Chair?
Sure, I
what
think it's
moved?
better to clear quickly, yeah. Madam
We
Jai,
have that motion if it is available in,
both languages?
yes.
Madam Clerk? Within the meantime, I would acknowledge Mr. Brunel Decep. You wanted to add something?
Il va falloir attendre.
I think we'll have to wait and see what happens with Ms. Kwan's motion because I have another motion.
Okay. I would like to deal with Madam Kwan's motion first, and then I'll come back to yours. Mr. Alcoy, you have on the same motion as Madam Kwan?
Mr. Chair, I would like, if it's possible, to receive the motion in writing to understand it perfectly, and then we could discuss it.
Okay. I'm going to suspend the meeting for a few minutes before we solve this issue here. Okay. Suspend it for a few minutes. and you have received on your P9 account. And if it's very clear. So I'll take a, Ms. Chong, is it clear now? Okay, looking at it. Okay. So can we take a vote on this now? Honorable Chong.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, with respect to the Madam Kwan, I don't support the motion just because I don't think going in camera should be a unanimous consent, should require unanimous consent. I think if it's the will of the majority of the committee to go into in camera or to adjourn or to do anything, the committee should so proceed, and I don't think we should subject it to unanimous consent. There are other tools available for members who have the minority of views on this committee, other than requiring unanimity. Thanks.
Thank you. Before I go to the vote, I will give Madam Kwan the last opportunity if she wants to say something. Otherwise, I will call the vote.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm ready for the vote.
Thank you. I'll call the vote. All in favor? All against? Defeated. And you want the recorded vote or? Okay, recorded vote. So, Madam Clerk, you will call the names.
So on the motion of Ms. Kwan, when I call your name, please say yay if you're in favor or nay if you're opposed. Ms. Bradford.
Nay.
Ms. Damoff.
Nay.
Monsieur El-Khoury.
Contre.
Nay.
Mr. Sidhu.
Nay.
Ms. Zaid.
Nay.
Mr. Brassard. Mr.
Nay.
Against.
Ms. Finlay.
Nope.
Mr. Halan.
Against.
Mr. Brunet-Duceppe.
Nay.
4.
Yeas pour 1, nays contre 10.
Motion defeated. I will give the floor to Mr. Brunel Duceppe.
Mr. Chair, is that it for routine motions? Is there another routine motion? In that case, I let Mr. Chong take the floor.
Monsieur le Président,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
je vais présenter
I am going to table a routine motion that was adopted in the Finance Committee
by the Finance Committee, I believe, earlier today, so the meeting minutes may not yet have been prepared to show that. But this motion was proposed by Liberal members on that committee, I believe, and adopted by the committee. And so this motion is a very simple motion that the committee authorize the clerk. I move that the committee authorize the clerk to distribute all committee documents to Mr. Alex Ruff.
That the committee authorizes the clerk to distribute all documents from the committee to Mr. Alex Ruff.
Behind this motion, Mr. Ruff was an infantry officer in the Royal Canadian Regiment. I see him actually looking at me on the big TV screen in front of me. He served in 6 operational deployments overseas, 2 of which were Operation Athena in Kandahar province in Afghanistan, and in the city of Kabul in 2007 and 2012. He also served in Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq in 2018, 2019, and so he may from time to time sit in on this committee to participate as one of the members of this committee. And so he would like to be on the same email list of members of this committee who receive documents from the clerk so that he can keep track of the committee's business and he can participate in the proceedings when he replaces one of substitutes in for one of the four of us here. I note that the Finance Committee did a similar thing with Mr. Bragascatos, who was recently appointed Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue. He has been put on the distribution list through a routine motion adopted by that committee for the Finance Committee so that he can keep track of the proceedings of that committee. So that's simply the reason for moving this motion, and I hope committee members will support it. Merci à tous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to take a vote on this one. All in favor? Carried. Anyone against? Sorry. Anyone against? No. Carried. Thank you. Okay, so that's it for Radish. Okay, so now back to you, Mr. Brunel Desapp.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I take my mask off when I speak in the microphone? Yes. It's easier this way. Thank you. Thank you and congratulations to your nomination as chair and to all the deputy chairs as well. I think we will have hard work to do here in this committee. So here's the motion that I'd like to propose that the clerk already has in her possession. Here's the motion. Pursuant to standing rules, the groups of the interpreter apologizes.
Je suis désolé, peut-être que je pourrais aller.
I think he's talking too fast.
Peut-être que
Ouais, excusez-moi, je suis vraiment désolé. Mes amis interprètes, je vous dois un verre. Bon, donc je recommence
Just
plus tranquillement.
there's no translation. There's translation problem.
The interpreter doesn't believe she has the text.
Non?
Hold on, Mr. Bruno Desapp for a second, please.
C'est pas ma faute. C'est pas ma faute. OK. Non, oui, je comprends.
Okay, go ahead.
OK. Je recommence plus lentement.
Okay, so I'll start over and go more slowly. And here is the motion. So according to the House's order from December 8th, the committee examines the possibility of using humanitarian measures to help the Afghan people that we consider involving the World Food Program, as well as helping our interpreters, and that the committee hold at least 3 meetings on that topic.
Madam Demoff, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a wonderful motion. I wonder if the mover would be agreeable to expanding it to other humanitarian organizations.
Sans aucun problème.
I don't, no issue with that.
Issues, if there's a consent, I will take a vote on this. All in favor?
Hold on, Chair. Because if we're going to add other humanitarian organizations, either we decide that we're going to submit other witnesses or we name them now. I think it might make more sense to adopt your motion as is, but add something that says, and other witnesses. I mean, I would like to hear from an organization that's assisting Afghan women and also from, there's World Vision Canada, I know has approached me about their challenges, but there may be others. So I'm wondering if we could submit additional witnesses by a certain date, and I'd be open to that.
Madam Dama, how about if we leave it a blanket, other organization that includes those anyways, right? Are you okay with that?
Sure.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay.
Okay. Honorable Chang.
Juste d'être clair, est-ce que M. Brunel de
I just want to be clear. Can Mr. Brunel Duceppe repeat the motion? But I have something to say. Mr. Chair, I agree with my friend Pam. If we add witnesses from other organizations, then we would have to add at least 2 sessions to do so. If we have more people, we need more time. So I can reread the motion and say, and other organizations, humanitarian organizations, but instead of 3 sessions, we would need 5. Would that work for everyone?
C'est bon?
Okay, any further discussion on this? Okay, Honorable Chang.
just to be clear, can we have the words of the original motion that M. Brunel Duceppe had presented? Can we have that repeated, please?
Repeated?
Oh, I don't have. So it's not in my. I don't have it. Hey.
I got it. 9.
Well, I don't have access to the other one.
Neither do I.
Can you send it to my? Okay.
Just a minute.
Question.
I'll do that. I'll recognize. Just one second. Let me sort out. Sorry, Madam Dama. I'll come back to you. Let me sort out first that Honorable Chong receives the wording of the motion.
Yeah.
So he did, and now floor is yours.
All of our P9s,
To all of our P9s, I didn't get it either.
Okay, Madam Clerk would send it to P9. I'll suspend the meeting for a few minutes and let me fix this, and then we'll come back. Okay. to take his seat. Could you please confirm if all members got the text of the motion? Okay. Madam Kwan, you got it?
Yes, I just got it. Just looking
Okay, I will open the floor for discussion on this one. Madam Jaid, and then Mr. Sidhu.
Thank you, Chair, and I agree with that. So I think I would also agree with Ms. Demoff's suggestion of adding more organizations to this motion. So I think it is. It would be right that if we add some more organizations and not just restrict to the ones which are mentioned in the motion.
Great. Parliamentary Secretary Sidhu.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I think it's a great motion presented by my colleague. Canada was one of the top 10 donors to Afghanistan before the turn of events, so there's a lot of organizations that I think we need to hear from and the important work that they were doing in Afghanistan, from supporting women and girls to our food program. So I do like the wording change suggestion and other organizations. I'm just worried that I really want to get a viewpoint from different organizations into what the situation on the ground is, because these organizations have direct ties, and how we can assist in the humanitarian efforts. And I understand Mr. Brunel Ducep's urgency on this one. And I think instead of 3 meetings, I think, as you suggested, I think 5 meetings would be ample time. But I think we should also set a date for when these witnesses should be submitted, so we can get to work. I don't know what the date, the will of the committee, of when we can submit these witnesses to the committee. Thank you.
I have the list. Next one is Madam Kwan, then Madam Damop, and then I'll come to you.
Just on a point of order, what are we on the amendment now? And if so, what is the amendment on the floor? Or are we on the main motion?
We are on the main motion with a friendly amendment.
Okay, and what is the amendment? So
Friendly amendment. Madam Damop, you want to repeat that, please?
So originally I had said other organizations, but while we were suspended, Monsieur Brunel Ducep pointed out to me that it already says "and NGOs working in Afghanistan," so I don't think that particular wording is needed. And then I think Mr. Brunel Ducep is going to amend his own motion to a certain number of meetings, or can he do that? If not, I would amend it to 5 meetings. Okay, so if I amend your motion, then we're going to debate the number of meetings, right?
Yeah.
So I will.
Brunel Ducep cannot amend his motion.
Right. Okay.
You got to bring in an amendment, and we can have a discussion on the amendment first now.
Okay, so I would.
Any speakers?
So I was going to amend it to 5 meetings, but I think there's just a little birdie has told me there might be consensus for 4 meetings. So I would amend it to be 4 meetings.
Can you read the amendment again, please?
To change the words 3 to 4 meetings.
Okay. Any discussions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for clarifying that. So we're on the amendment to amend the motion to 4 meetings.
Right.
I support that, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Chong. And Madam Kwan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I support that amendment. I support the motion, but I'd like to do a sub-amendment, if I may. I think that of urgency as well is that we need to look at immigration measures to bring Afghan refugees and their families here to Canada, and particularly those who served Canada. So I'd like to propose a sub-amendment to add the words immigration measures after the word humanitarian assistance, so that it would read that pursuant to the order of the House adopted on December 8th, 2021, the committee assessed the humanitarian assistance measures and immigration measures to be put in place by Canada to bring relief to the Afghan people, that the committee invites representatives of the World Food Program, groups of veterans involved in the repatriation of Afghan interpreters, and NGOs working in Afghanistan, and I'm going to ask family members and family members to do so, that the committee hold, and I would further amend then.
Madam Kwan, this can't be amended because this is altogether is a separate motion as per my discussion with the clerk. So I would focus right now the discussion only on the friendly amendment by Parliamentary Secretary Tamov. And then I'll come back to if you want to propose your motion again.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
we can do that. I thought we can do a sub-amendment.
No,
It's not a,
it's not an amendment to the number of meetings. It's altogether is a different motion.
or she could move it as an amendment.
Or you can move, you,
Okay,
Yeah. Okay.
fine.
This is just the number of meetings.
yeah. So we are just working on the number of meetings. So once
Yep.
we finalize that, and then we can come back to your motion. Okay, any discussion on the number of meetings? No? If no discussion, I'll take a vote on that motion as amended.
Just the amendment.
Just the amendment, yes. All in favor? Carried. Okay, and now we can go back to Madam Kwan, right?
Okay, now I'll move another amendment then to the amended motion. So back to what I was saying, I think it is important to also look at immigration measures as an urgent matter in addition to the humanitarian assistance measures. So I'd like to propose an amendment to add immigration measures after the words humanitarian assistance measures. So it would read that pursuant to the order of the House adopted on December 8th, 2021, the committee assess the humanitarian assistance measures and immigration measures to be put in place by Canada to bring relief to the Afghan people. That the committee invites representatives of the World Food Program, groups of veterans involved in the repatriation of Afghan interpreters, and NGOs working in Afghanistan, and family members, to add the words "and family members," to do so, that the committee hold a minimum of, and I like to amend the amended number of meetings from 4 to 8.
I will, Mr. Brunel de Sepp, you want to speak on this?
Yes. I understand the spirit of the amendment that was just proposed, but I think that the motion, as it is amended with 4 meetings, with the focus on the humanitarian crisis, that's the spirit of the motion that was adopted in Parliament in order to strike this committee to study the humanitarian crisis. Therefore, I think that we've already agreed to 4 sessions. And when it comes to immigration, I think that that discussion will follow during other meetings with another motion. So my current motion was amended by Ms. Demuff, and there will be other meetings to discuss immigration. So currently, I am against this new motion in order to simplify things.
But just recognize her and she'll be.
Madam Kwan, it is my understanding that you got to withdraw this motion and unanimously, and then you can bring it back with a unanimous.
Just let her speak.
Huh?
She's going to.
Withdraw. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In an effort to be collaborative, so what I would like to do then is withdraw my amendment, and I'll move that as a separate motion, and maybe that would simplify things.
Thank you. And Madam Jai, you had your hand. You want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to what Ms. Kwan proposed,
But that
now
is
she
not
has
on the
taken
floor
that.
right now.
Yeah.
So, okay, so Madam Damhoff, please.
Question through you, Chair. Does the mover of the motion want to add a date by which the witnesses need to be submitted to the clerk? I'll leave it to his judgment if.
Mr. Brunel de Sepp, you have anything to add before we take a vote?
Attendez, j'ai perdu une seconde.
My apologies. I lost 1 second of the interpretation. There was a very important part of the sentence. So if you could repeat yourself, that would be great.
Ah, oui.
If we should add.
Oui, tout à fait.
Yes, of course. Yes. So if we want to be realistic, we'd have to know when the committee will have its first meeting. That would help us figure out a deadline. And I don't think we've yet decided on a date for the first meeting. We would have to figure that out 1 week ahead of the first meeting. So is this what we're talking about right now? Yeah?
And I think it's very clear, Madam Damoff. Okay. And I don't see any other member that want to speak. So I would like to take the vote of the motion as amended. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. Madam Kwan, can I go to just quickly check with the Honorable Chong if he has, I'll come to you, but if he has something to say on the same motion that got passed. Honorable Chong, please.
No, I just had another point to make after.
After Madam Kwan? Okay. Okay, I will give the floor to Madam Kwan on her motion.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. So then I'd like to move a new motion then, which really mimics the wording of this last one that we just voted on. And so the motion would read that pursuant to the order of the House adopted on December 8th, 2021, the committee assessed the immigration measures to be put in place by Canada to bring relief to the Afghan people, that the committee invite groups of veterans involved in the repatriation of Afghan interpreters and NGOs working in Afghanistan and family members. To do so, that the committee hold a minimum of 4 meetings.
Thank you, Madam Kwan. I would like to ask you, just a friendly thing, would you like to distribute this motion and we bring this motion on the next meeting, or you want to?
No, I'd like for us to debate this motion and vote on it today.
Thank you. And now I will take the names. Madam Jaid and then Mr. Sidhu, or otherwise, whoever.
And we have the motion in both the languages. If Madam Clerk can email us, or if we can have, if Ms. Kwan has the motion written in both the languages, if it can be distributed to all the members so that we can have a look.
Honorable Chong, because Ms. Sidhu is before that, but I mean, I would still skip and give to you an opportunity to speak.
So while the motion's being distributed, I'm a little concerned about adopting this motion, not so much because of the substance of it, but rather because we've adopted, Monsieur, the motion, we just adopted a motion setting aside 4 meetings for the committee to call witnesses. That will take 2 weeks. And then if we adopt this motion, that will take another 2 weeks. And so it'll be 4 weeks before we're able to hear from departmental officials and ministers. And I think that we should be hearing from ministers, at least, or I think we should be hearing from ministers and departmental officials earlier than that. And I point to the terms of the order from the House. In Clause K, it says clearly that that a whole range of ministers and other senior officials be invited to appear. And so I think it's really important that you, Mr. Chair, ensure that the clerk invite those witnesses and that those witnesses appear in front of this committee. That those, they're not witnesses technically, but that those ministers be invited to appear in front of the committee before too long. Obviously, ministers have busy schedules, and they may not be able to make an appearance in the first 2 weeks or so that the committee begins its proceedings at the end of January. But I certainly expect that they would appear in front of this committee by mid to late February. So in that context, I'm a little concerned about the motion that we might be pushing these appearances off till March or even April, which in my view is far too late, considering that this committee is to have reported back to the House of Commons by the end of May, early June. And so if we are to, if we are to adopt Madame Kwan's motion, I would hope that you, Mr. Chair, would ensure that the committee invites those individuals in Clause K ahead of, before too long, so we don't have to wait till March before we hear from ministers and other departmental officials.
Okay, thank you. And I will go to Mr. Sidhu and then Madam Kwan.
My colleague, Ms. Sahid, already made my points. Okay.
Thank you. Madam Kwan, you want to say the final word before because it's going to be 8:30. So if you want to get this motion finalized, I would like you to make the final remarks, and then we can take a vote on this one.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to be clear, in moving this motion is not meant to sidestep or to usurp the opportunity to invite ministers and officials to this committee. I guess maybe this committee operates a little bit differently than the other committees that I normally sit on, because we would actually move a bunch of things, and then we would actually have a subcommittee to actually organize the dates of how we, when we can bring witnesses forward and so on and so forth. So this is not meant to sidestep that. I do think, though, that we should hear from officials and ministers, absolutely, but of the urgency of the situation in my mind and for New Democrats is that, yes, we need to get humanitarian aid to people in Afghanistan, but we also need to bring people to safety. And those two things are of utmost urgency in my mind. So that's the reason why I moved my motion. I want to make sure that this committee looks into immigration measures in order to bring people to safety.
I just want to make sure that every member realizes that there's only one meeting a week. There are not two meetings a week as usual meetings. So we don't have much time, Honorable Chong. So I agree with you. I think if we have to bring in all those witnesses, then we keep on adding. We're not going to get anywhere. So you support this motion now?
Well, I'm prepared to support it under the understanding, even in light of the one meeting a week, under the understanding that ministers and departmental officials will be invited to appear, not after these witnesses concerning humanitarian assistance and concerning immigration measures are invited to appear, but sometime during those other scheduled periods. In other words,
so you want to amend the motion then?
No, I don't. No, because the House motion is the House motion.
House motion takes precedence.
I'm asking you as chair to give us assurances that if this current motion is adopted, that motion, along with the previous motion adopted, doesn't mean that we're not inviting ministers and departmental officials to appear at the very end of the 8 meetings that we were holding on these two particular issues.
Okay, Madam Zaid, and then Madam Damo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I think we are already at 8:30. And we have decided, we have passed one motion, and we will have 4 meetings on that. So maybe if we can have, Ms. Kwan can bring that motion in the next meeting. So that, because we need to look into the language also.
Sure. And Madam Damo?
I was just going to say the motion actually says that the witnesses Mr. Chong mentioned would appear from time to time as the committee sees fit. So I'm in complete agreement with the motion that we passed, and I think that's the motion the committee has passed at this point. Then we can work on a work plan moving forward. And I, too, would like to see Ms. Kwan's motion in writing before I vote on it.
Sure. Madam Kwan,
We just sent the motion to the clerk, so.
So it's already 8:32, and Madam Damoff? Sorry.
On the motion?
Pardon?
I would move that we adjourn debate on the motion.
Seconds here. Bringing the meeting back to order again. Madam Kwan. Madam Damoff proposed a motion to adjourn the debate, and that is a non-debatable motion, so I have to take a vote on that one. So all in favor of...
Please.
I'm ready to go.
All in favor of the Damoff's motion, please? All in favor? Call the motion. Okay, we'll have the recorded vote.
Appel au règlement juste qu'on...
Point of order. Can we repeat what we're voting on, please? I'm sorry.
Madam Damoff brought in a motion to adjourn the debate on that motion, so that's what we are voting on. Okay. Okay, I'll ask...
On the motion to adjourn the debate, Ms. Bradford. Yay. Ms. Damoff.
Yes?
Monsieur El Khoury.
Yes.
Monsieur Sidhu.
Yes.
Madame Zaid.
Oui?
Mr. Bradford.
No.
Mr. Chong.
No.
Ms. Findlay.
No.
Mr. Halan.
No.
Monsieur Brunel Duceppe.
Oui.
Ms. Kwan.
No.
Yeas pour 6, nays contre 5.
So I declare the motion by Madam Damoff passed, and the debate is adjourned, and it's already 8:35. I would like to see if we can end the meeting right now. Okay? Meeting is adjourned. Ready? Thank you.